My guest today is Rick Remender, a guy who has written, inked, and illustrated all sorts of comics from self-published to indie to mainstream, all sorts of creator-owned titles. Let's get into exactly what his work schedule is like, what his techniques are. Rick, thank you very much for being here with me. I appreciate
Hey,
it.
Chris. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well,
I need
thanks
to,
for making your bed. That's
uh, I gotta. It's not my bed. I feel like I gotta set the stage in advance. We're renting a house just to stay away from the area we were in to hide from the COVID. A lot of folks weren't wearing masks, and so we had to get away. So we are off in the out.
wow. I'm sorry that you've been impacted so directly. Is that true?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, you're a sarcastic guy. I was just double checking.
No, it's true. It's safe. You made the right choice. My
Yeah,
uh, my wife is immunocompromised, and so is my son. So we fled humanity once we couldn't even walk because people weren't wearing masks and where we were at, and so it was like, okay, we're just gonna we're just gonna go rent something away from people for a beat here. And so
right.
um, my kids are homeschooling in the room next door, and my wife is trying to navigate that while I'm here in the bedroom. And it's like also to set sort of a sultry mood, to make things feel a little intimate between us.
Definitely, definitely. I appreciate that. So you were thinking well ahead. You were like, when I do interviews, a sultry mood. That's the ticket.
I think it'll bring out I think tonally it'll bring out something in us both that will be more intimate and a little bit. There might be a little more love. And hey, if the world needs anything right now,
It's
love.
love, sweet love. Well, now I'm sort of curious, just because this, relates to talking about, how you work and learning about how various, writers work. But does this make your job easier or harder, not working at home? I don't know if you need a certain studio setup or if you feel like really comfortable working almost anywhere.
Well, I've got a home office, and then I've got the giant generator office in Pasadena. And I was just getting very comfortable with getting out of the house and not being a troglodyte, and seeing that my friends in the office and having coffee and normalizing things. And I found that is better for my productivity in terms of like splitting my day up between home and work. There were years there that I just worked at home, and there was that delineation becomes very difficult where, I'm like telling the kids like, no, I'm at work now. And they're like, but you're here. I'm like, ah. And so this is sort of something that I'm familiar with and have obviously done a lot. And, when Danny and I were first married and very poor, the size of this room was all we had. So it was like the living room, bedroom mix up. And so I was, so she's used to me working like this as well. But I will say that in terms of creativity, I think that the reaction I've had to all of the anxiety and horror has been, I'm still working, but I am like probably only about 30% at I'm usually pretty
Mhm.
prolific, and I can do a good 12-hour day and compartmentalize and multitask.
Yeah,
And that's not the case. My brain is so actively fried, and the daily ingestion of stress
right.
um, and horror, it's a very interesting effect that it's had. I feel like the work I'm doing is more methodical and thoughtful. Like I'm back to a place where though my productivity has diminished, the amount of time I'm spending swimming in the projects, just based on the inability to have any sort of snappy schedule based, let's go to the next one. Let's go to the next one. Instead, I just sort of sit there and go, everything's sad, bee boo hoo. And it's fun though, because I'm writing the Scumbag a lot, and I'm getting to force myself to, try to be funny and be stupid and have fun.
I'm sure it's a challenge. It's interesting. All these things that you talked about are things that I'd like to now follow up on, but I'd love to guide the viewer here a little bit chronologically. So, to begin with, I know I discovered some of your comics like Blackheart Billy, like basically 20 years ago now. You've been working in comics for a while. Before you started doing some of that self-published stuff and having it published by Slave Labor Graphics, you worked in animation. But I don't know exactly what you did in animation and what made you decide that you wanted to move towards comics. Could you give us a little bit of that background?
Yeah, so when I was 21, Don Bluth moved his animation studio to Phoenix, where I had grown up. And I was eager to get out of Phoenix and move, and I was getting ready to. And then the animation studio, Fox Animation, opens up in Phoenix in anyway. So I applied and got a job as an assistant animator. And so at the time, that was a real job. I dropped out of college and I got to make a living making, working on Anastasia. And that was 1995 when I first did that. And that sort of led me down a road of I stayed in animation as an assistant, then moving to Los Angeles to work on the Iron Giant, and then moved up to San Francisco, where that was sort of where I wanted to land, and got a job. I sold a couple of cartoons to a small studio there, and then got funded by Yahoo to open my own animation studio. And so had a little animation studio in San Francisco. And then I would teach to help pay the bills at the same time at the Academy of Art University up there. But then even after, with all those things going on, I couldn't stop making comics. And so my life was just workaholic 101, because I had this insatiable need to make comic books. And, this is a time when the industry was completely dead, and black and white comics couldn't have been more dead. It was
right, yeah. The 90s was post, the stuff like Ninja Turtles, Usagi Yojimbo, Cerebus. Yeah, black and white didn't really get another sort of burst until maybe Bone, maybe?
Bone, and then Walking Dead. I mean, they're still very few and far between when they hit. But so it certainly was not something that was selling well. I think that the best sales you could find at the time for black and white would have been like maybe Evan Dorkin with Milk and Cheese.
Yeah, definitely.
Anyway, but it wasn't about that. It was like, the animation studio was funded and I had all these job offers and I could make all this money at these various places. And I had this stupid voice in my head that just says, no, I want to make comics. Baby wants comics. And I think it's because it has, I always go back to the purity of intention. Whatever gets done gets on the page and it goes out to a human being, and the human being reads it, and they may not like it, but it's at least not filtered through a bunch of other people's filters. So that basically, once I was in San Francisco, I started working with Kieran Dwyer, and shared a studio with him and Derek Robertson and John Hebink for a little while. And Kieran and I were, started the animation studio together, and we were doing that. And then during all that time, I was also drawing the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Yep.
Writing books like Blackheart Billy, and then developing Strange Girl, Last Days of American Crime, Fear Agent Nightmare, a whole pile of stuff that I started getting together in 2004 and then getting out by 2005. So I'm sorry to give you the whole. I'm going down memory lane. The long and the short of it is I left in 2005. I got a job at Electronic Arts, where I was working as a storyboard artist, and then eventually was one of the writers on the Dead Space video game.
Yeah.
And they wanted me to be one of the leads on a Simpsons video game franchise they were going to build. And I'm a big Simpsons fan.
Yeah.
So being able to sit around storyboarding and designing Simpsons video games was like a dream for me. But I also was finally seeing things like Fear Agent and Strange Girl pick up, and to see some interest in my writing after all those years. And so we either were going to stay in San Francisco and I was going to be a cubicle guy at Electronic Arts, or we were going to move to Portland, which was much cheaper, and give the comic book writing thing a full-time swing. So,
right.
We made the choice to go up to Portland, and then I've been sort of doing that since. I think the last book I drew would have been 2006, would have been The Last Christmas, written by Brian Post.
How did you ever meet him, actually? Because he actually has a joke in his, well, he doesn't really tell it anymore, but he used to have a joke in his stand-up that was specifically about you and that like Wham Christmas song. How did you guys ever meet though?
He's got another bit in there about me about our arguments about these new Star Wars movies, which I find funny. And he wonderfully equates his defense of them to a battered child who remembers, the good old days.
Yeah.
Brian, I was at WonderCon in 1999, 98?
Okay.
98 or 99, anyway. And there was a after party at Comics Experience, or anyway, some San Francisco comic book shop, and I ended up meeting Brian in the back, and we started just shooting the shit and became pals and just hit it off. So,
just curious.
Yeah.
You have now done a lot of different creator-owned books, and one thing that I've always been amazed at, this actually sort of relates, is you seem amazing at networking. Some of the artists, well, all of the artists, honestly, that you get are top tier. You've worked with some amazing, amazing artists. Greg Ticini and Sean Gordon Murphy, and I guess I could list them all, but like so many great artists. I'm curious, for a creator-owned project, how are you getting in touch? How do you sort of scout out the artists that you want to work with? Is that all just networking at conventions? Is it online interactions? How are you finding some of these people? Because a lot of them, I'll also point out, you work with a lot of people that haven't had a lot of experience in the industry, and they're like, sort of like discoveries.
I mean, as an artist, one of my favorite things to do is to scour the internet and look at art. And so I have giant morgues and files of artists that I like to follow, and people that I dream that I might work with one day.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it is eventually, like, I'll reach out and it's just about taking swings, and I'll reach out to artists a lot of the time, and say, hey, I'm a huge fan, and I think that we should do something together. And if they're open to it, then we start talking. I think that the important thing about being a good collaborator and working in a collaborative industry, and not treating artists like extensions of your ego. There's a lot of writers that are so full of their own shit that they just think that these guys and gals are just people who are supposed to bring their brilliance to the world. And I think that you don't get a good performance out of a human being from doing that, and you don't have a good soulful experience working with somebody who you can maybe make a friend with and enjoy the process, which is why we became artists and writers to begin with. I otherwise would be, I should be a banker. And so I reach out, and I usually pitch ideas, like a handful of ideas. I ask what they're interested in, and then from there, if they pick an idea, which is normally how that works, and then I'll throw titles out at them, and they'll pick a title, and then I'll go back and forth, and we just sort of start, cross-pollinating at that point, and make sure that, their visual, their desires and their integrity are incorporated into the projects, so that we're doing something that they're not just an extension of me going, here's my idea, here's what the characters look like, here's this. I come in with an amorphous sort of basic idea, high concept. Sometimes they're, a little more nailed down than others, or I'll come down with like 5 different, because I have I'm always developing 5 or 6 things. And the artist will go, oh my God, I love the sound of that. And I go, great. And then we'll start sort of ping-ponging, and then they'll send a sketch, and I'll go, what about this? And then we kind of just develop. And it's the most exciting thing in the world to me. There's nothing more purely creative. There's nothing that, reconnects me with that childhood joy of creation than that part of getting in, to work with a new artist. And then a lot of the others, like, Jerome Opeña was the star student when I was teaching at the Academy of Art. And we became,
okay.
His sketchbook was passed around like legend. He and John Wayshak both, were guys that I was really lucky to get to work with. They were Bay Area legends. So just knew them from my time in the Bay. Greg Tocchini I met through Raphael Albuquerque. In some other cases, it's like, and then Ben Gall, just been a fan of his going back forever, and because there's something about when you're dealing with I have all these French editions of Ben Gall books, and because he's French, I was like, oh, Ben Gall, and you imagine I was very intimidated at first working with him, especially, since we ended up doing such a book that was so outside of his wheelhouse, in Death or Glory.
Yeah.
Anyway, go down the list. Wes Craig, was somebody who had contacted me a few times, and we had talked. And then he did a Batman book with Lee Lowridge that I saw, and it reminded me of him. And I looked back at this folder I'd been keeping of his work, and so I contacted Wes about Deadly Class. And I'm always looking. I'd much rather would work with a really hungry and talented human being who is still passionate about craft and making something, and find people who are sort of underserviced or sort of undiscovered,
Yeah.
or not as, and work with them, because it just feels, not that I've worked with plenty of people in at Marvel, especially, who are wonderful and big names.
Sure.
From Daniel Acuna to Stuart Immonen to, go down the list. And they were all, and, John Romita Jr. were like really kind and wonderful people. But there's something a little more grassroots, I suppose, about finding somebody online who's just a really talented artist, and then saying, hey, let's build something and try and see how far we can take this. And seeing people fall in love with the Wes Craigs and the Ben Galls who hadn't, or Tokini, or any of these, even Jerome still. I was posting Seven to Eternity stuff the other day, and somebody's like, who's this? And you go, that's the mighty Jerome Opena. That's all P.P. Opena. You got to go look.
It sounds like getting buy-in from your collaborators then is a pretty key point in your creative process, making sure that they're not just work for hire, that they bought in and added something to it.
Oh yeah. And I mean, we share ownership 50-50. I mean, I don't mind saying I've got the best deal in comic books. I want, and now I broke the glass ceiling in Hollywood, where I've showrun my own television show, and I'm working on an adaptation of a movie right now of mine, and I've got a couple other big things that I'm announcing soon, as well as Fear Agent with Seth Rogen over at Amazon.
Right.
But I want to be able to take creators and show them how to do that, and help them take that same path to seeing that your original creations, and to use the terminology of your IP, sorry, but these things are intellectual properties, and they are valuable. And
right.
To learn how to bridge the gap from being a creator to the business end of things, where you're the person who can help sell that, and then get into the business of translating it into other media. It's something that I enjoy trying to teach. It's been, because of my history and what I've done, 20 years of this, I know both sides of these things. And I think that the comics industry can be so much more if more people know how to do that, and don't allow themselves to be sort of drawn through it and then taken advantage of down the road. And so I don't see them. They're I try to, I in most of these instances, we become really close friends, and we become, like Matteo Scalera and I spent, countless hundreds of hours on Skype talking, and anyway, you want that, because you want to work with people that you like, you want to enjoy the process, in the sort of dynamics that form in the creative process make such a determination of what comes out the other end, where you're both valuing each other, and you're enjoying your time with one another, you're enjoying your work. That's why we got into the arts, I think, and especially storytelling. For storytellers, it's really important. And if you're at odds or there's conflict, who wants that?
I don't know how much this is related, but you broke in, eventually did some stuff with Image, like you were mentioning earlier, like Red Sea and Strange Mary and all that. Sea of Red. It's been a long time. It's been a long time since those.
Salamander Sammy and the Big Johnson and Red Sky Bob.
Close enough. Like a pretty long run at Marvel, and I loved your work at Marvel for what it's worth. Like I'm just gonna put this on the side. Like Uncanny X-Force is pretty much like my favorite X-Men related story ever. I sincerely loved that run. Had some great artists there too. But now you've for quite a while been back at doing creator-owned, creator-owned, creator-owned. What was that experience like, sort of doing more of the work for hire? Was it still rewarding? Did you just like burn out on it? Like, what was that whole time like? Would you do it again?
Oh no. I don't fit there. It's not where I'm supposed to be. And the world has a wonderful way of letting you know where you belong, and I don't belong there. There were some fun aspects, like X-Force, was, I spent the 80s reading Chris Claremont X-Men, and X-Force was like second or third tier to them at Marvel. So they didn't care what, I was able to bring in my art friends and bring in Tokini and Jerome and get to, bring in Phil Noto and get to bring in, Robbie Rodriguez and get to bring in, convince Esad to do all the covers when they were trying to get him to leave after issue 4. And it was just this stitched together fight. But no, I mean, I don't make any, I don't mind at this point in time, I don't mind saying I didn't go into Marvel with anybody supporting me much. They saw that I had access to some artists and that, throw me some of the 90s relic books that nobody gave a shit about. It was a challenge, and ultimately I made my mind up that, if I couldn't take those characters, if I couldn't take, a Venom who had a degree of popularity always, but it was seen as like 90s, Gur-Hiss anti-hero stuff, that if I couldn't take that and do something good with it, then what kind of a writer am I? So I worked myself to death on those. It always felt like an uphill battle. I felt like there was a lot of things I pitched that were really good, that they maybe sat on those ideas and gave them to other people later, as they are wont to do. I feel like this. I feel like I dumped a lot of myself into a lot of those books, because you have to in order to make things that are going to be evergreen and matter.
Yeah.
And I feel like it was an opportunity to build an audience and to like get more people to put more eyes on my work. I feel like you have to go into that knowing it. I feel like the company knows it. I feel like if you think you're going to go there and live your life there, I mean,
That's
I guess
not really a thing anymore. Huh?
I guess maybe 2 or 3 people live that existence, but then they when they leave, they own nothing.
Right.
Instead of being in that penthouse discotheque corporate, caviar party, I'm better on the street building my own house and seeing what I can do.
You're fortunate to live in this current generation, like where people can create and own their own things. If we went back 30, 40 years, not as easy to do. So
my generation also made it happen. I mean,
of course,
taking books like The Walking Dead and things like Fear Agent, Strange Girl, what Garth was doing, Vertigo bridges that gap.
Yeah.
But even they have Warner Brothers fingers right up your asshole. I mean, so really it's the late 90s with, Eric Larson and Valentino and those guys saying they're going to make a deal at Image Central that'll beat everything. The creators can just own 100% of what they create.
Amazing.
And but nobody ran to it. It was like, it's insane how long it took. And so we were all there building it through the aughts. And it was just, I at a certain point, I'll be honest, lost hope. After living in extreme poverty and trying to make books, like Strange Girl and Fear Agent and Sea of Red and all of the various things that we were doing, trying to do interesting genres that were underrepresented or not represented at all in comic books, and to make new things, which is what all of us were doing back then.
Yeah.
I gave up and went hat in hand to Marvel to go build an audience.
It's interesting that you talk about the different genres, because that's actually the next thing I really wanted to talk about. Is when I look at your oeuvre of work, you do a lot of stories that are sci-fi, supernatural. You've done crime and horror, not like for creator-owned stuff, not really superheroes. What genres appeal to you? What inspires you as a writer?
I'm more of a film and television and novel guy. My love of comic books my love of comic books outside of the things I grew up on with Jim Shooter's Marvel, is the unique individual voices. It's Adrian Tomei, it's Dan Clowes, it's Evan Dorkin, it's people, it's cartoonists, it's people who are out there and expressing themselves and doing unique things.
Yeah.
I like to try to mix that with my love of Saturday morning cartoon aesthetics. I like to try to take, if I'm going to do a book about a vampire pirate that sounds silly and ludicrous, but it has fun visuals and it's swashbuckling and it's gonna be fun to write. I also try to make sure that I find something to say. If I'm going to do something about a tech addicted future with a love story about codependence and tech addiction, that I'm writing something. Well, that comes sort of secondary. The world of Tokyo Ghost is one that we've seen a bit. The cyberpunk, the oceans are rising, things are getting bad, blah blah blah. But then trying to find my personal in and trying to find something I want to say, a la the tech addiction.
I had a follow-up question, and you're touching on it already, is your work pretty much always has a reason to exist beyond just a plot or interesting characters. You usually have like a theme. You have something to say. A lot of your work deals with loss and depression. Is that accurate, do you think, if I'm noticing that? Would you say that those are topics that interest you? Or is that unintentional and that's something I'm reading?
But I think if you're looking at it, what's interesting is the books that have been the most popular are the books I'm exploring those themes in. And I've got a theory that everybody is pretty depressed, and everybody wants to voyeuristically respond to they want the identification of, I also felt that, I also experienced that. When somebody cracks open their chest and goes, look at all that broken shit in there, other people go, I've got broken shit. And it's interesting because I get that a lot. And I go, well, the first book I did about depression was Fear Agent, which that was my first big hit. Then, but Strange Girl's not about depression. Strange Girl's about a lot of other things. And so Sea of Red at the same time wasn't about depression. But I think that people do respond to that, the work I do that deals with those topics. Deadly Class would be another one.
And Low.
And Low for sure. And Low, I have to try to write
title alone gives you an indication.
Yeah, no, there's for sure aspects of me, and Low is built on my years in therapy and processing the journey to the top, and my mom's sort of pragmatism and eternal optimism, or eternal optimism, and my pragmatism, which leads me to view everything as probably going to end in flames.
Probably.
Anyway, so yes, to a degree, I would say half of my work does deal with the fact that I'm a depressive nihilist.
You say that, and you gave some examples where, hey, it's not really about that, and I've read that stuff, and all of a sudden I'm realizing maybe that there was some reader bias there. I definitely deal with depression, and I probably just really key in and identify with some of this stuff, so that's just more towards the forefront of what I'm thinking about right now. So you're probably right. There's probably some reader bias there of me just latching on and going like, yes, there are other people that feel this way.
I think so. And I think that if you're experiencing that stuff as well, and I have written about it, and there are a lot of aspects of that, like I said, in the books that I mentioned, we all feel, I think art at its finest is about identification, and it's about letting us feel that we're not alone.
Yeah.
And expression through art, when it's at its best, is when I'm reading something and realizing all of the things that I think are uniquely fucked up about me, all of the pain or all of the dysfunction or all of the things that are uniquely like, God, why did I say that? I'm such an idiot. It's all of us, not all of us, but there's a breed of us, and there are other people like you out there. And I think that's where we're finding I don't want to say home, but that's where we're finding like-minded, identifiable, souls out in the world that make us feel less alone.
I think I agree. I think that makes sense. I want to talk about some of the stuff you're doing now. You have launched your own Imprint giant generator. I'm curious, what are the benefits of doing something like that? What are your goals with giant generator? Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, it was like, I think I was rambling on about it earlier. For me, the goal is to have an imprint and a production company. And Giant Generator also was one of the producing companies on Deadly Class and is on a number of other projects that I'm working on. But to have an imprint and a production company that cross-pollinated, so that comic books, I always use purity of intention, because it's a place where a couple people or even one person can come up with an idea and put it into the world and translate it through their own voice with, with very few filters. And that's why graphic novels and comic books are being adapted so much, because there's a spigot of creativity that nobody's put a corporate nuzzle on it yet. I mean, Marvel and DC have, but at other places, and even those places, you can still find, like you were mentioning, the people off in the corner doing interesting shit.
Talent rises to the top, of course, but I totally agree. Like, I think that's some of what I'm passionate about in comics is you're getting a very clear vision. Even when it's a collaboration, it's not that many people, it's not diluted mostly. It's amazing how comics are so unique in that regard. I mean, the only thing that can really come close to getting a whole story across with a singular voice is a book. But if you're into visuals, like, I don't think movies can even compete personally. And I love movies and TV, but I love that comics are so unrestrained and can do what a creator wants to tell without being diluted. I love that. I love that aspect.
Yeah, and I do too. And I think that it's such a risk to go into it as an industry. It's such a goddamn slog. I spent 10 years in extreme poverty. I mean, extreme poverty, living in a garage next to a freeway, working 15 hours a day, 7 days a week to do it because I love it. And for me, Giant Generator, the mission statement, and especially as we begin to expand it and it begins to grow and I'm building on it, is to make sure that the people who take those risks, the people who create and innovate, and the voices who are taking the risks to make their own work, if it's going to be translated down the road, or if they want to be involved in seeing how to turn it into a film or a cartoon or a television show or a video game, I've done all those jobs. I've done almost every job there is in all of those industries. And so I want to share that. I want to share that, and I want to be able to help, so when I start publishing other books or some of the plans that I have in mind, the people who make those books won't be treated like, there was I have been, in one particular process, I was treated like, I made a book that was adapted, and I was treated like a third-hand piece of shit. And I was not included in the creative. It was the worst experience of my life. It's a book I love and spent years on and poured a lot of myself into.
Okay.
And the adaptation process was every cliche that you would imagine about a Hollywood experience. So I've always held that as part of, as I'm developing these things, to make sure even, anything that I can do that helps bridge the gap between my collaborators or people that I publish at Giant Generator, and enabling them to understand the harsh realities of those adaptations and how hard it is. But if they want to be involved and be heard and have a seat at the table and have a voice, they should be, because they're the ones who fucking created the fucking thing. Yeah. And these, a lot of people want to buy the thing and then broom these people out of the way. And that's something that, as we develop more and more, that won't be, you're not going to be seeing that happen with anyone or anything I publish at Giant Generator ever again.
That's, the Hollywood system to a degree, or that's just honestly business. That let's not limit it to Hollywood. That's business.
Sure.
But I have seen some good producers out there that seem to care about protecting certain comic books. I feel like, well, you've worked with both of them at this point, because I was going to say that, like, Seth Rogen and the Russo brothers definitely seem to be guys that help protect the vision of the creations. They've both helped adapt some comic books and tried to, sort of protect what's unique about them. So there are some people out there that and I guess your goal is to try to put people in touch with like-minded goals, right?
That's right. To work with those kinds of people who respect creators, like Seth and the Russos respect they, and obviously, now Robert Kirkman's in a position where he's producing a bunch. Obviously, he has that respect. But Seth and the Russo brothers, they have they have so much respect for that. Joe Russo is the reason I was able to show run my television show.
That's awesome.
Joe Russo, walked, I showed I could do it. And Joe Russo was like, he was like a bulletproof Don pushing through, or tank. Bulletproof Dawn. I just read another Trump article. Get out of my brain.
Yeah.
But then as he's literally making Avengers Endgame, and still coming into the Deadly Class editing bay and eating pizza with us at night and teaching me how to, do his little editing tricks. And no, we cut out here and then we speed this bit up, and some of the Saya action sequences are edited by Joe, and I got to sit there and learn that. And so I've learned how to edit television through Joe Russo, taking nights off after filming the Endgame to come in and
the biggest movie. Like you'd think that would monopolize anyone's time. Amazing.
And that was in those meetings where I convinced him to give the shield to Sam so that my Marvel catalog would blow up and I'd get rich.
Wait, is that true or is that made up? Is that true? Did you suggest that?
I for sure did, but I'm 100% certain that was already something they were going to be doing because he was very tight-lipped. You
can sell all your inventory on eBay and retire.
Yeah. If only. But anyway, so yeah, there are lots of people, and my earlier comment wasn't to say that there aren't good people. It's only to say that of what I'm doing. What there isn't, though, is there isn't an immediate bridge to the creators being hands-on involved in those adaptations in the way that I got to be because of the Russos, because of Seth, because of these guys who have, who value where the material comes from.
You are kind of known, like you said, like right now you're slowed down on multitasking on a number of titles, but you still are always doing a number of projects at once. Like as long as I've known you, you've been writing multiple titles, and now these days, we don't know everything that you're doing, but you're doing some of these adaptations as well as keeping some of your comics going. What can you tell us about guiding us through a work day for you? Like as in I know you've also got to balance family, but what time are you getting up? How are you deciding which projects you work on a given day, and how far into the day do you take that?
I'm old now, and my old brain will not do what my young brain did. I used to be able to hop from project to project, and I would quickly, there was still some flexibility up there, and I could go from this to that to this to that, and I could jump around in one day.
Yeah.
That fucking shatters me now. If I'm working on one thing and somebody's like, I need you to jump on this other thing and do a rewrite, I go, no. And I go, it's got to be tomorrow. I can't start it. So I'm in a really weird point where if I wake up, whatever I pick to start on that day, that's what I'm working on.
Okay.
And you say, which is good though, because it also, I think, has been helping me connect with immersion into the story that you maybe lose by allowing yourself to be distracted or thrown to different projects. And so I get up, I try to get an hour or two of email out of the way for all of the various publishing and production stuff. And then if I have any other scripts to read or anybody else's, I'll do that. I'll try to do any of the business in the morning. And then I'll pick a thing and I'll say, what's on fire? And lately it's, been like the Scumbag. And so we're getting Deadly Class back up and running, or doing the last arc of Seven to Eternity, doing the last arc of Low, coupled with the feature that I was writing and the two TV shows I'm developing. So it really comes down to, forcing yourself, at least for me, to compartmentalize as best as you can without you can. It's interesting. I'm sorry to go on and on about this, but it is a fascinating thing because you can feel, I think, the anxiety rise from multitasking.
Mm. Oh, yeah.
The more things the more fires you're letting yourself kind of look at, then the anxiety goes up. And the anxiety is the creativity killer. The higher your anxiety, the less sort of like, you're not going to be a playful, you're not going to allow yourself to do crazy fun things and express anything other than, Gah!
Yeah,
You know,
this is helpful to hear.
a lot of Black science comes from that place. A lot of Black science comes from Grant, the workaholic wanting to write the workaholic. And the fear that I would end up being the guy who abandoned his family and writing that, well, I never became Grant, but he was always the cautionary tale. But that anxiety voice, he was always very easy to write in those stages of like, oh, it's too much. So I find by compartmentalizing, no matter how much you're doing, and it might mean you have to work weekends, but by picking the one thing to write that day and getting as much as you can, and frankly, until it's done. So like if I'm working, I just finished the latest Deadly Class comic, and we spent months trying to, workshopping what we're going to be doing and coming back. And then it took me, I had an outline, it took me 5 days to get the draft done. And that's not with solid dialogue, that's good dialogue. But then I rewrite the dialogue for another week once the art comes in.
Sure.
And if in the middle of the Deadly Class, somebody had said, you have to go do something else. Like, I'm like on page 12 and like, you have to break away from that and go write this other thing. It would cost me multiple days of acclimating to the new world, getting myself, and I can't anyway.
Once you start on something, unless it's like, nuclear, you're committed to like wrapping that up that day.
That's or I'm committed to that until it's wrapped up.
Sure.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Do you work like, extremely long days, or do you intentionally try to keep, sort of like a normal work schedule, like, like somebody that punches in an office? I'm just curious what you need to do to get your work done. What's your process?
It's chaos. I lately, since I put on because of the autoimmune diseases in my family, we locked in the end of February. Okay. So I was in full quarantine all of March, April, May, June. I put on about 30 pounds in those 4 months. My okay. Prozac was carbohydrates.
Yeah.
Yeah, I should see how much pizza I could go eat. I bet I could eat a lot, and I bet I would feel something different while I did it. So since we came and rented this house to get away from humanity, and we've been here, I've been trying to get up at 7 a.m, go for a run, come in and do 2-3 hours of emails and phone calls and interviews and things. And then once I get through that stuff, I'll go and hang out with the kids and the family, come back in, and then I'll write for, however much energy I have, which pre-quarantine and pre-horror, my energy level would be pretty high. I could sit down and do 8-10 hours, with breaks. And now it's like some days I do 4 or 5 hours and I'm just, you can just feel yourself turn into a noodle. You're like, oh.
I don't think you're alone in that, Rick. I really don't. I think all of us definitely feel that. So I appreciate the effort that you're putting out, because I'm still enjoying. When I read your comics, I can't tell what's going on in your life. I'm engaged and immersed in the story. So it's amazing that you can like compartmentalize to that degree, that you can have real world stress in your life. Who doesn't have it like these days? Things are quite bad. And that you can still like, tell a story in another world with other characters. That is a type of compartmentalizing that's very impressive, and it's very interesting that some people have the aptitude for it better than others. It's very interesting.
I don't know if it's aptitude. I don't know if it's. I think all of
it's work. I'm not saying that it's magic and that like some people have talent.
I wasn't being defensive, but I mean it in like, I think that anyone. I always say that anyone can do it, and that anyone can do what I do. Anyone can do what anyone does. It's really about an adherence to discipline and craft, and a dedication and a fire. And if you don't have the fire that like you want to do it, then you won't, because the shit you have to eat and the road to getting it is going to be rough. But I do believe that anyone can do it. And in terms of the compartmentalizing, I do think that's a learned skill from having done this for so long. I imagine that just anyone watching or anybody, or I think anyone can do it. If you know,
I think that that's amazing advice. I hope that like people out there that are like hoping to potentially do comics or even something creative are listening and seeing how that might relate to them. And of course, you're right. Like it's keeping that passion though. And you're only going to be successful at something you're passionate about. To be honest, like you don't try to follow trends or anything. You gotta be passionate about it. But let me let me sort of close out with I'd really like to know about your current upcoming project. I've been seeing this stuff mentioned in social media quite a bit. Scumbag. Tell us a little bit about what Scumbag is. Like what makes this one unique.
Well, at the core, it was a book for me. They say it was just something I wanted to do. I had this idea, in the world that we're living in now, that, all of these horrors keep happening. And we have a population of apathetic, and I know some people that are very apathetic. Fuck it, why bother? It's all melting down. Who cares? And that coupled with this idea that I had going back further, which was, what if you gave a super soldier style serum to the worst person on earth instead of a Steve Rogers, you gave it to a fentanyl addict who was just ethicless and just a low life. And so that always tickled me because it was like, a grown up Matthew McConaughey from Dazed and Confused or The Big Lebowski is now serving as 007. And I found there's aspects of it that also were about the now that this guy's got this responsibility, he also was a wonderful, Ernie Ray Clementine is the lead character. And he also became this sort of wonderful representation for the American non-voter and for the sort of apathetic, checked out, I'm not getting involved guy. Because now he's got the power to choose which way the country goes. He's got the power to choose. And so there's all these various terrorist organizations. And the first one that he's up against is called Scorpionus. And they're run by an ultra-right nationalist. Literally, there's the ultra-nationalist who's this giant, like, Richard Spencer Hulk with Cuck Crusher tattooed on his arm. And, he's led by the Prosoma, the head of the Scorpion. And they're trying to make America great again, right? And there's a number of others that we'll meet along the way. But Ernie has to now choose whether he's going to remain this sort of, apathetic, disaffected drug addict who doesn't see any point in anything, or if he's going to stand up and pick a side and help us. And that came out of some arguments that I've had with people over the last 5 years. And the apathy is an interesting thing. It's an interesting character arc to take somebody from the lowest point in their life, fentanyl addicted, total drug addicted, hopeless, just getting by, figuring out how to steal enough to beg, borrow, and steal to get your fix, and then to make them arc into having to choose the future of the United States.
I mean, yeah, moral conflicts like that are relatable no matter where you fall. And of course, like, I love that because we could all be that in some ways. I mean, obviously, we're not getting super soldier serums to sort of force us to make these decisions, but we can all make the decision whether we're going to be apathetic or whether we're going to acknowledge that there are issues and at least try to make things better.
Yeah.
We can all identify with a decision like that. We're just not being forced into it like this character. That's really interesting.
But we are, but we are the American non-voter. It's like making a huge choice right now.
You're right. That came from a position of extreme privilege to even casually say something like that.
It's just, I think that's sort of the challenge of writing Ernie for me. And I know, I'm giving away a little bit too much here. But it's an interesting aspect of the book, and maybe it'll help people take the ride. I know that, a lot of folks think that I'm just doing more Blackheart Billy or Deadpool, which for sure I like writing those characters and, have have.
Well, I was going to say, like, even though it's obviously like there's a serious, like, like platform to build on, you're a pretty funny guy and you do well with some of these like wise ass characters. Is there some humor in it, or is this
Oh
like
man,
pretty
that's my.
nihilistic?
I look. I can. I don't know if it's funny, but I know that it. Like I'm enjoying writing it, and
Okay.
it's the kind of stupid that I did with Deadpool and helped sort of breathe new life into that character, and the same stuff I did with Blackheart Billy for the few people who saw that stuff. And it's something that I just hadn't. I haven't done it in forever, and I'm so the world is awful. It's just a terrible. I lost my father 10 months ago, and then Deadly Class got canceled because we couldn't figure out. It never ended up on a streamer that would have given it the. And I love the show. I got to make a show with the Russo brothers, and it's fucking Benedict Wong, and I love the show. So then that happened, and then I won't bore you with
It
it.
was
But
very good, Rick. It was very good, and it deserved better. Like everybody involved, that you had a great cast, you had great writers. The music selection was amazing. Like
I just got to
deserved
sit
a little better.
and pick the music for a TV show, and then learn how to edit with Joe Russo, and it was just such a wonderful experience getting to showrun that thing. And I think that and make so many friends, and anyway, but there was just so many hits one after another, and then there was another show that we hadn't announced that was about to get greenlit, and then through some machinations of fate blew up on the launch pad a month before Deadly Class. And then losing my father, and then the pandemic, and then I won't even go into it. Like, the year has been so awful that when I go to write Ernie Ray Clementine and I write The Scumbag, it's hard at first, the like starting that engine of like absurd, but then I give myself permission to go like, I don't fucking care what anybody thinks. I'm just writing this for me. It's going to be 100% for me. And I just go at it like I want to hire. We're hiring a different great artist every issue to like. It's a complete experiment in every way. And I just got an email from Image 5 minutes before I hopped on here that it's my best-selling Image book of all time.
That's interesting to hear because you've definitely had plenty of success with Image. That's amazing to hear. Maybe there's something that people are connecting with there that I don't understand yet. I mean, until I can read it, I really won't know. I'm excited to check it out. It's also interesting that you say that you're writing it, for yourself. And I will say that, like, I honestly think that when it comes to almost any creative endeavor, there has to be an element where you are the first audience or you're not going to be passionate about something.
Yeah.
If you tried to just write something that you think people will relate to, maybe it hits, maybe it doesn't. But if you're passionate about it, if you're enjoying it, there's probably going to be other people that think like us. We're the same in a lot of ways, like even when we don't think we are. So I think writing for yourself is important.
Yeah, if you don't let your freak flag fly, then you'll never draw in similar weirdos, is what I always said. And so
you build your own audience too. You build the audience that you want if you're writing for yourself and things.
And even if the thing isn't a huge success, whatever you make, it one day might be because you love it. You'll never stop like talking about it. I was digging through Strange Girl files today because I still love that book so much, and I was finding this arc I did with this artist Nick Stackle and Michelle Madsen, and it's so good. And if, at the time, nobody was reading, female leads, and nobody was picking up, Image books. It was 2006, 2007.
I was reading it, but yeah.
You were. And I remember that was when we met. But there were very few others. And so the numbers were down. But if you love it and it's pure and you mean it, then it'll live forever because you'll be out there shaking it. And there's things that I've made that I don't feel that way about, and I'm not still keeping them alive. I'm not breathing on the flames to give them oxygen.
I appreciate you sharing. You've been really open and transparent about a lot of stuff today, and I really, really appreciate that, Rick. Anything else that you were like, moving towards that you want to talk about? Like, I'll just give you a moment here if there was anything else that you wanted to let my viewers know about, potential readers know about.
We are moving into the last issue of Low after 10 years from the point when I first pitched it to Tokini. We are arriving at the end of that story. Greg he started drawing it in 2012 or 2013, and there are very few artists willing or able to put the kind of love and devotion into one single series for 10 years as Greg has, with the beautiful colors of Dave McCaig. Dave spends 3 times longer coloring Low than anything. It's
Wow.
Every panel is a work of love, and we love this book very much. And much like Fear Agent, I always feel like because of the shipping time, because we just put Fear Agent out when we could, it didn't blow up until the second hardcover came out. It was very strange. Until the book was in 2 oversized library editions, it suddenly just exploded at that point.
Yeah.
And it became this huge phenomenon like I'd never seen. But we had to make Fear Agent for 8 years in a vacuum. Now, Low has been a much better seller. There's a different world now, of course. And oddly, it's the biggest book I have in the book market. But
I love it.
I hope that anyone who hasn't read it will go get the oversized hardcover. I give a full money back guarantee. It's a $50 hardcover.
Wow.
500 pages of just love and blood from Greg and I, with Dave McCaig and Russ Wooten on lettering. And if you don't love it, I'll just PayPal you the $50 back. And in preparation of issue 26 coming out pretty soon here in the next 6 weeks, I believe, where we hopefully land the plane and make longtime fans and readers who stuck with us happy.
Do you find endings especially difficult, or do you feel like that they sort of evolve naturally? Do you have an ending in mind when you start most things, or not?
Some, I know that Death or Glory, sticking the landing is the most important thing. I read somewhere once that a reader's reaction and a reader's emotional response and their long-term impression of the work is 80% informed by the ending.
I think that's true.
And so
I thought about it with film and stuff like that. Sometimes like a really good final act, and then when I rewatch it for maybe a 3rd or 4th time, I realize, oh, kind of a slow middle that I just have like forgiven completely because I just have such a great experience at the end. And that's true with comics too.
So I think with anything, that end reaction where they leave you is everything.
Yeah.
And I've always done my very best. Even like in X-Force, where they were moving me on to other books and it was happening, I was like writing 5 other things. I still found 2 weeks to lock myself in a rental house to write the last arc, to make
Bless
sure
you for that
it felt like an ending. And that one day, if people read all of my X-Force run, the same with Fear Agent. Fear Agent was down to 2,000 copies. And I still had to, I wrote the ending. I said, make yourself cry. and I went in and I rewrote it until I made tears well up. I rewrote it and I rewrote it and I rewrote it, and it was the death of a character, and people who've read Fear Agent, and I rewrote it, and then I dug through all of my dad's favorite Mark Twain was Letters from the Earth, and it's from a Mark Twain who'd lost all his money and been cheated, and his wife was dead, and all of his kids, all of his daughters died except for one. And he was done with God, and he was done with man, and he was done with all of it. But it's Twain. It's fucking amazing. And so I went through there and I found the best Mark Twain quote that exists to end it, because you have to find that well of passion and energy that started the project, and you have to find it at the end when the only people who are left aren't making a big lot of noise. They're waiting for it, and they're out there. But there's not like a bunch of interviews coming in. There's not a big promotional effort for the final issue. The fans aren't like screaming all the time. That's the beginning. And if you're feeding on that, if that's the vampire's delight, by the end, you're alone in a room with nothing to eat. Right. And you got to find it from within to make sure that every ending. And I will say that from Venom to all the work I did at Marvel to Strange Girl to Fear Agent to Black Science to Death or Glory, and now 7 to Eternity and Low that I'm ending this year, I've done the very, very best I can.
I believe you. It's amazing to hear that you're the kind of guy who's willing to edit and rewrite. I think that that's the work part of comics. The passion and the ideas kind of comes more easy. The rewriting is the work. And as just one example, because I've read like all these, I'll just like close by saying Uncanny X-Force really impressed me because of that ending. I was enjoying it. But, you know, these are serialized superheroes that you sort of know are going to continue forever. So what makes an arc good is like an actual end point. And you started with this idea of superheroes being proactive and like then sort of learning from their mistakes. And they were all legit changed at the end. Now, if any other writers want to use that or whatever, that's on them. But I could read like that arc, and that was like you had an actual ending where people changed.
And you have to assume that in Marvel, you have to assume it's going to not, the next writer is not.
Could ignore it, could build whatever. Who knows?
Yeah, you have to assume that what you're writing is going to have a beginning, middle, and an end and move on.
I'm just saying that that's extra impressive because, hey, with Fear Agent, with Low or something, that's 100% your terms from beginning to end. But that like show, I was really impressed that you could come up with an end point that was so great within a serialized superhero world. And I know you did it with a couple other things too, but like just really stands out as a highlight for me. I really appreciate getting to talk comics, but like also talk technique and stuff. I'm very, very grateful for your time today, Rick. You're obviously a very busy guy. So thank you so much for giving the viewers so much access. Really amazing to learn about.
Yeah, it's been a nice sort of side effect of the pandemic and being at home more is I've been able to do more of these and talk to my old friends and talk comic books and I miss it. You know, we don't do cons. So
yeah.
All these thoughts and this shit matters to me. I like it, and you know, there's nowhere to express it. So it's great that you're out there still doing it, and I appreciate you having me on.
Thank you so much for your time. Take care.
Okay, thanks, Chris.